Mandela's talk at UCT. And he said something interesting, which is about the need for Africa to claim world history. And I also think that it's important not to silo our history, because we must also contest particularly European history. Europe itself exists as a construction of the lands that it pillaged, and the other expressions that Macaulay alluded to. So in that way, it is, as unfortunate as it may be, I feel it's important to embrace that aspect. That shouldn't be misinterpreted, but to embrace that aspect of our heritage as being something as part of an ongoing project that we must deal with it. We must deal with the fact that we were colonized. It's one thing to erase memory perhaps, but I think it's impossible in my mind to erase history. That's almost what contextualizes us about where we are geographically, socially, and politically. And in that way, I feel like then South African heritage is this. Alex mentioned this in the videos. In this video, it's a project to unify people. So what's being spoken about today seems like the separation of two different peoples and their political trajectories. So in that way, it becomes interesting to understand how history is then rewritten and how we take agency in writing history and changing the course of history, particularly forward-looking. So what does it then mean to say that what we don't want is South African heritage? What is the heritage that we want and which direction are we moving to? And then what does it mean for the likes who attach their heritage to roads? I don't believe that removing the statue is erasing history. I believe it's destroying a particular association. Those who want to, you can look at South Africa's heritage from various dimensions. So by destroying roads, there's a particular message that is sent to those who attach meaning or ascribe meaning to a particular understanding of South African heritage. So then, what is the question to the panel is, particularly through language, what is the positive way in which we want to ascribe a direction to our heritage? Are there perhaps different words we want to use to describe the trajectory? A different name for Southern Africa, and why?
So, you were talking about having a heritage of dispossessed people as Black people. And it took me back to what Cabral says. He says that when foreign domination comes into a territory, it either liquidates the culture, the people, or it dominates the culture that already exists and erases the culture of the people to a point where they themselves don't exist, but they're living, right? So now we find ourselves in a circumstance where populations have been liquidated. The ones that remain cultureless, in the sense that we have lost our lineage. We have lost parts of our culture that will never regain again, and that's because it was part of the plan of colonization, to strip us of culture and make us objects. And now that we find ourselves, like so many generations later, where we've been given these concepts of heritage, these concepts of unity, reconciliation. What does it mean to have this history of dispossession and this culture of struggle? And how do we regain our own existence beyond struggle? Because it's actually not something to be celebrated, the fact that our culture is based on struggle. It's like our tears shouldn't be part of our pride. And it has to stop at some point. So we find ourselves right now struggling. So at which point will our culture actually be based on our existence?
Yes, in fact, this conversation actually puts an emphasis to the fact that I can't address it, I can't even answer to. Because most of the times when I engage in such conversations, even if they are small with my friends, I always find that we always automatically, when we engage in such things, we'll always use English. And I always wonder, even if it's black people only, I wonder why. It always makes me think, before the settlers came into South Africa, does this mean our people never interacted? Were there no cultural interactions, intra or intercultural interactions, or inter-nations, as you put it, international interactions? And if they did, how did they? What languages did they use? How did they communicate? Because I know for a fact from the literature we've been engaging with, Amaxhosa did have intercultural marriages with other nations. In fact, the so-called Khoisan. Sometime, hence we have cliques. In my language, we didn't have cliques, but because there was this intercultural relations, then all that thing actually brings it to mind. Is there no way then that we can, because we can't say that we want to do all that we want to do. We want to re-engineer our own heritage without wanting to involve whatever is colonial. Because first of all, the language is very important. We find ourselves, when I want to interact with Mapaseka, why is it difficult for me to interact with her in my own language? And her not finding any difficulty in understanding, but always for her to understand, I always have to resort to English. So this actually brings a question in my mind: how did the people before colonialism interact? Because I'm sure these nations did interact with each other.
Before I go through Mali, there's one thing that I want to speak on. Perhaps we can generalize. Comrades, we must be honest with ourselves. You know, this thing of honesty is very key. There is no history, there is no pre-colonial history that we can go back to. Everything is distorted. Everything that we understand as pre-colonial history, the mere fact that is given to us to study by those who still hold power, we should question it. You know, why is it pre-colonial to begin? And so that's my first point of departure, because this thing of always saying African heritage, kings, queens, we are not kings, we are not queens. we are sheep-ins and shed dwellers. That's what we are. Nothing but conquered and defeated souls. So we must be honest with ourselves. And we move from that point of being honest. Because we are going to run a risk of this historical, I'll call it, I don't want to put historical masturbation, of always wanting to go back. You know, there's nothing to go back to. But at the same time, we ought to look at history. There's a difference between going back and looking at history. We ought to look at history as a vintage point of a source, where we gather our source. Well, you know, where do we trace a lineage of warriors? You know, how do those lineage of warriors can inspire us to move forward into? So there was not, because we can never go back. We are stuck here. We are in the belly of the beast. Can we deal with the belly of the beast before thinking about pre-colonial and you don't imagine ways? So that leads me to what you were talking about, Mali. I think when we are talking about culture in itself as a means of grappling with our surroundings and ways of surviving, we ought to be honest with ourselves that for the things that happen to us, we shouldn't be alive. The act of being alive in itself is culture. The act of navigating ourselves into these spaces, you know, whether it's a site of resistance or it's a site of assimilation, that in itself is culture. There's always a continuous culture that has happened. So there's never been a point where people are living without culture. Yes, we have been disconnected to the memory, you know, and the spiritual connection that we have with the old, you know, culture and memories of our people. But if you understand the real principles of African cultures or any culture, that is we should not allow ourselves to be subjected to any form of injustices. That's the first principle of African cultures. So if we follow that trail of thoughts, we begin to say, look, what we are doing now as forms of resistance is living up to that African culture, because we are saying we can't be reduced to objects in our own land. So that to me, it's very cultural. And in a process of, because these things, you can never say after 20 years, now we are going to be free, then we are going to have culture. It's a continuous thing, you know. Each and every day we are making and building, you know, connecting the dots of what the reimagining a society that we want to find ourselves in. So to me, when will we see a day where we will live culture without pain, you know, without tears, is the day we decide, you know, and we assert ourselves as people who do not appreciate or do not want to dwell in a world which there are injustices. That's living up to being a cultured person. And secondly, I want to add another chance and give other people a chance because of this. Yeah. So lastly, when we look at culture and look at our existence, I tend to bend towards the idea of we can never recreate ourselves while there is still an existing system, because everywhere in the world there's a black body, you know, you are not welcome. So for us moving outside of the system, or moving ourselves from the system while there is already an existing system, in itself is a problem. We cannot exist in a one world. These are contradiction, antagonist relationships. You know? One has to die before the other lives. And in this instance, whiteness has lived for black people to die. We are dead. That's why we find ourselves other people are living. So we can never breathe in the same space unless we reimagine the world as we know it, and perhaps come with a new language into moving forward and tracing how we can imagine ourselves as decolonialization. That is to the end of the world as we all know it, and the change of tables as we understand it.
Unfortunately, I don't like having a dialogue with my colleagues, but I'm going to have to say something because it's important to listen when we're talking to ourselves. Pay attention to what you're saying when talking. Because when you were starting, you did say that there's no culture to go back to. There's no colonial history to go to. If you talk about pre-colonial, you talk about a culture, because there was a particular way of being before the encounter with Europe. That is culture. And then you again, when you're explaining, as you're going on to explain, you're saying that we need to go back and take from something. And that is culture that we take from. My point there is, you need to be careful how you are stating what you're intending to state, because it sounds contradictory in a way. And for me, I would definitely say that it is important not to always want to, I think partly speaks to what man is saying, we cannot celebrate our pain. Being in a state of celebrating our continuous disposition and being kept in a state of mental, or being, you know, this state where we are mentally reduced to nothing. And I cannot celebrate that. Now, for me, I would say it is important to know, as we are continuously in this space of life, black consciousness to what? Because black consciousness removes us from being subject of oppression, or rather having an awareness of our oppression, but then having an awareness only is not good enough. Where do you move to after having that awareness that you are an oppressed person? You have to know where you're coming from to know how to move away. And this is very important, because if there's anything that most people might need to understand about this particular issue of oppression, which you can call it colonialism, imperialism, neocolonialism, it cannot live for eternity, not unless the oppressed people are giving it the attention that it's looking for. The only reason white supremacy and racism lives on is because black people do not want to look back to where they're coming from and move towards that, and leave whatever this illusion that has been created, we've been brought into, walk away from it. Now, and I say this because the one thing that has made white supremacy so effective in colonizing black people, the fact that they create concepts and define our reality based on those concepts. And we act out those concepts as if they were our reality. And then that's how you maintain a system. You come up with a system of understanding, and then you tell people this is how things are. People act it out. Black people need to move away from this system. Now the question is, move away to where? Because the land is occupied. Everything depends on the land. Because it would be very easy for African people, and African people, because when you're talking about black, you're talking about skin color. Black is an adjective. That's not an identity. Being black, being white, those are adjectives. Now, you need to have an identity. Our identity was African. And being black, those are categories that were created to differentiate between the oppressor and in fact, if you look at the theories of racism, you understand where the description of people as black, white, brown, yellow, and all these other descriptions. But my point is this: when we are talking about these experiences of decolonization or revolutionary experiences, we need to understand what is it that we're talking about. We are talking about an oppression, and we're talking about an oppressive system of racism, and it is global. And when you want to move away then from that system, where are you moving away to? You need to know where you came from to know where you're going. Or unless then you want to do what Steve Biko said, or what Dr. Thomas Sankara said, if we do not dismantle this system, we are going to be the new masters over our own people, which is what has been happening in the continent. So what I'm saying is, I do not dispute anything that is being said here, but it is important to know. And for me, this is where actually I have grown a lot in understanding what has happened to African people. I look at what white people have done with the colonial experience, not necessarily with wanting to be shouting at them, but to understand why they did what they did. Because when I understand that, I need to know then how to move away from it. Because it has nothing to do with our best interests as African people. This system as it exists right now was not designed for the well-being of African people. That is why a whole bunch of you African students in this university are depressed. Because the system is not designed in line with the core or the essence of who you are as an African person. Now, to close off the conversation, I just want to say this. The language part, gentlemen, unfortunately, I don't see how it will ever be easy for us to say we're walking away from English. Because English has become so embedded in our psyche that even if we're trying to speak it, some of us started with this and all of a sudden we went into English. Now that is not because he does not want to speak his Xhosa, it is in the mind. And when Ngugi was talking about decolonization of the mind, he was referring to that. You have to understand what has been done to you. And the only way you can understand that is to understand how the system operates. And people need to go into the theories of racism. And Biko is that. Fanon is that, but he was talking from a context of colonialism. And if people are talking just to have conversation or debate, intellectual debate, but not to practically implement what is said by those people, unfortunately we'll be stuck in this space, cycling non-stop as if we're in the gym. I am not interested in that. What I'm interested in is to move towards African consciousness. How do you do that? If you go to the library, for example, there are books for people who are speaking Xhosa, written by our own ancestors, the A.C. Jordan, the W.A. Thompson. They are telling us how we lived before the colonial experience. And to be African then is not just to have your Afro hair like I do, not just to wear this, it is a conscious state of mind. It is a consciousness. It is what you eat, it is what you listen to. You cannot tell yourself that you are African conscious while you are busy listening to Britney Spears. You are going to have to listen to your own. Do you know what I mean? So my point, gentlemen, and ladies and gentlemen, is that we are in a very, I agree with Master, we're in a bed of the beast. And the unfortunate reality about being in that state is the fact that there are people who do not understand. Or if they do understand, those who do understand, they are not really engaging what exactly is the nature of this system that we are dealing with. Until people go to that level of understanding the system, this global system of white supremacy, and how it functions, and how it maintains itself, and how it keeps itself healthy in the minds of black people, unfortunately, we will always be stuck in the same space. And I call revolution a personal transformation. And I will no longer be engaging in marches and protests, because to protest, it means that you have no idea what's going on. You cannot go on the street without understanding why you're on the street in the first place. You need to begin with the revolutionary process that changes you, the person, before you start telling other people what it is that ought to be done. And that is my contribution.
I was going to answer a question that Brian posed at us as well, and of language. Well, to name a country, it has to be about the aspirations to make that country your own, to make it that the people, the majority of the people who are owning it, are the people who will have that kind of sense to name it, you know. It's going to be who are going to be the decision makers, and the kind of name that is given to that is one that is suggestive of who are the stakeholders, you know, what happens in the dealings of the country, the ideologies that, and how the generations are going to be brought up, what kind of education will they be given. You know, it's about the people who are going to be giving those, who will be making those decisions. So, with the way South Africa is given the name South Africa, like it has gone through many changes under colonialism. It was first the Union, and then Republic, and then South Africa. But there's always this South Africa. So there's that undertone of colonialism. Although there's independence, you know, it's always written down on paper. But there's those undertones, you know, of British, and then now American imperialism, and now probably China, we don't know, you know. So if there would be a name for it, it would have to be a name that comes from ourselves. If you look at Zimbabwe right now, it was Rhodesia, but then it was renamed Zimbabwe. That is now suggestive of who the new boss is, you know, and it is also renamed after a structure that was a great trading place in that place, the stone enclosures, which is what it is, the translation of the name. So maybe even us, you would have to look for a structure or something, but it would have to come from us. That's the thing. Which language? We don't know. We don't know, but it's something that has to be from us. And then to answer your question, Aka, how did the people before colonialism interact? Individuals are very creative, you see. Irrespective of whether this one is speaking, okay, even these Swana, these are all, you know, linguistic features which were exploited to separate people into tribes and cultures and everything. Okay, to go back to the thing that people are creative. They do find ways of speaking with each other. We have Fanagalo in the mines, which is a mixture of Isulu, Iskosa, or whichever linguistic background someone has. It goes there, they stay together, they start adopting this feature and that feature so as to live together, to be able to communicate. You see, if we would go back to Iskosa, you speak Iskosa? If we would go back to Iskosa and see Iskosa, how it was spoken hundreds or 200 years ago, it is different to Iskosa that we would see now. We will see traces of, oh, that is the same word as how it is in Isotho, in Ispepi. You even see traces with Iskosa and Benda. So there's always this continuation of working out a language to suit yourself. So they do. And they do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Statement you just almost on about us not being able to trace back where you come from with the culture. As you're sitting there, what is there is just a body. The many souls are within you, so those souls do not only consider your soul down as one. The great souls of the great forefathers are also within you. That's why you have this power, this consciousness that is in you again. So that is another way of tracing where we come from back then again. So I think we sometimes underestimate the spiritual sense that we have as human beings, especially as Africans. So if we can listen to that, maybe we can somehow make sense of where we find ourselves in today. Yes, we cannot go back, but that spirit has been guiding people. The bodies have been killed non-stop, but the spirit never dies. Even you can be shot right now. Your spirit will live on, will come in another form again from someone else. So the spirit never dies.
I think the real question here about heritage is about our being, it's about existence, right? And culture is, it's a mode of that existence, so it's the language of our existence. And what's happened, obviously, with the colonial experience is that our existence has been distorted and it's been liquidated completely. So I think it's very important for us to actually look back and understand our existence. But we also, like Master was saying, we need to be conscious of our existence right now. Our existence right now is, like we were saying, it is shaped in the townships. It's shaped by white supremacy. Unfortunately, this is our existence right now. And we have to be honest with that fact. And we can't just romanticize ourselves as kings and queens. We're not living like kings and queens. We're not, you know? So we need to be, like, that honesty is, it's like the beginning of consciousness, you know? You can't claim consciousness when you don't understand that you are being oppressed, you know? And that's the starting point. And I think, you know, I think that's where we should start. We need to understand that we are actually being oppressed. But we can't at the same time dismiss our history. And I think in order to move forward, we need to be able to put those two together. And I think that would be, I think that's the difficulty, I guess, in reimagining ourselves and reinforcing an African consciousness somehow moving forward.
Knowing that culture and heritage is always something that emanates from the current material conditions, as Umar Tole said, that if you look at now, we are nothing but just geo objects. I imagine that if we do move forward, that our culture will still, and our heritage, whatever shape we take, will have to then take into considerations the way we're living at that moment. Now, what that brings to me then is the question of what do we do with the important one? In a sense that you have white people who have come with their European culture, and in that sense then, if we are to move forward in a country or in a continent where we don't kick them out, they are there, it would then, it seems to me that it would then have to take into our culture, and if you look at it, how people have always made a sense of the place they will be, it will then seem to me that it will have to take into that sense into it as well. And now a question, to what extent will the superiority complex of that new culture, that whiteness within that new culture play?
The issue of consciousness, I was talking about it, is a very critical fact that I think most people have taken for granted, and particularly African people. African people want to be taken seriously in everything, but they don't take themselves seriously. Now, to know where to go from this state that we must call it articulated, the state of nothingness, in the face of whiteness, to understand how to get out of it, you need to understand how you got into it. And when you understand how you got into it, and understanding how you are living, as we must express it as state of nothingness for African people, then you people from the Akan culture, they call it Sankofa. Sankofa is going back and referring back to your history, which you cannot discount. Make use of whatever that is useful to step outside of this state of darkness, a state of nothingness, into something. Now, for me, what I struggle with to understand is that we have a tendency as African people to not indulge in that history because it is written about. The books are in the library, and not the books that are written by Europeans. I'm talking about books that are written by African people who are as equally who are equally unhappy, who were equally unhappy with the European colonization of Africa. Now, when we read those people in the form of poems, in the forms of short stories, in the form of drama, in so many forms, they are telling us what happened to African people with the colonial conquest. And they are explaining, they even tell in those books, they foretold even the state that we're in right now. There's a book written by A.C. Jordan, and it's called Towards the African Literature. You should go check that book in the library and read it. There's a book by W.K. Thompson. He is foretelling, it was written in 1954. At that time, they are foretelling what's going to happen. At this point in time, reading in Sukhosa. And then going back to how did African people, African nations work with each other, the intermarriages. S. Jordan, as well, in a book called Wisdom Because Zasetsisa, he writes about how people in the South African territory interacted with people in Zimbabwe and people in Swaziland and all those other people. It is there. Now, what I have found interesting about African people, and in this particular context, I'm talking UCT, you African students, you have tended, whether rightfully so or not, to always be shouting at white people. I'm not necessarily saying directly at their faces, without understanding yourself first. Now, before you look at someone for what they've done to you, why don't you guys go into the library, take out the books that are written about us, about our history, understand what is it that Europeans took us away from, and put us in this state that Umakole is explaining, and then think about them how to get out of it. Because there is no way you are only going to be indulging in a state of darkness without necessarily thinking how to get out of it. And to get out of it, you need to know where you were to be outside of it. So for me, the issue of consciousness is precisely knowing. Consciousness is getting to know something that you're not aware of and living it if you want to live it. Now, there was a point in time Malaka that did not know the depth of our condition in the context of whiteness until I came into contact with Anlem Gutama. Now, Anlem Gutama is not a very friendly person. Like he uses a similar language. He gets you out of your very comfortable state of house Negro. And then he will take you out of it by force, intellectually. And then you start thinking that maybe I should go read, why is he talking like this to me? I went to read. When I started reading, I understood why Anlem Gutama is forever angry with what has happened to South African people. And he is always talking about the land. Now, only when you read our history and what has happened in this context of having been under the system of white supremacy, you understand why he is always saying the same thing. Because he understands the value of the land in the healing of African people. But for me, I will leave after talking right now. I might not speak to some people who are interested in the conversation. My point is this, ladies and gentlemen, when I started understanding the severity of this system that we are living in at this moment, and I mean intellectually, I knew it in terms of my lived experience. There is no way you can call yourself someone who is revolutionary, who is going to liberate people. Because to liberate people, you need yourself first to liberate yourself. And sometimes you can be so angry without even understanding that the anger is actually the reason why you cannot step out of this whole situation. Now, I've managed through reading books to step outside and look at the situation from the outside as things stand right now from my point of view. I owe no one any explanation. I'm at UCT part-time teaching right now, and I speak my mind. And there is not a single person who's going to tell me what I say in class is not true. Because that is something that I've read from people who have taught here, S.C. Jordan, and they are Achima Feji, who have been telling us about what happened to us. And as people who are in activism, particularly in this group, you can't just be talking about black consciousness and black power and all these things without understanding where we came from and where we should be going. And this is where I think most people are even scared to step outside of being the slaves from the system, because they don't know where they're going after you remove them. Because it's so comfortable sometimes to have a white person making decisions on your behalf. Then if you do not know where you're going from there, and if you guys do not make those people understand where to go from there, how do you expect them to move away from that state of being oppressed? And I'm talking to the issue of consciousness. Consciousness is levels. It's not something that is at the same level. There are different levels to consciousness. And as you go deeper and deeper and deeper, you will see actually the fallacy of this system for what it is. And if you are a smart person, I would say read. Because the moment you read and get deeper into the consciousness of this system as it is, and what was there before, you can literally step away from it. and you can literally repudiate it for what it is, a fantasy, an illusion, what the Matrix movie calls a matrix. And it's literally that. And a lot of black people just need to be applied for it, and it's going to collapse. It is that simple.
My 2 cents, and I'm out below. We must be honest with each other. Because honesty is key into moving forward. And I say this because immediately when the settlers entered our shores, you were no longer a nation, you were made in Africa. The identity that we became to embrace as African is a creation of the colonial conquest in itself. So we must also understand that even us as Africans, to adopt the word African was a political tool. To adopt the word black is also a political tool. You know, so we must not be confused. Secondly, I argue that even within spirituality, we must begin to further interrogate what do you mean when you say people always have spirit lying around. When you see our type of existence, for spirituality, to have spirituality to begin with, you must be in a state of knowing the self. Black people don't know themselves. Black people do not have autonomy of themselves. Black people don't have land. Black people are miserable in the face of the earth. How do you expect those people to find themselves and have spirituality and able? So I'm confused by these cultural terms and all of these things. If anything that black people or African people are creating, if it does not move them to a point of resistance, then it's meaningless.
Why are you wearing a Sokoto t-shirt if you're not staying?
No. I'm wearing a Sokoto t-shirt because I'm wearing a Sokoto t-shirt because my friend Tamzi printed them and said, Mascolo, do you want a t-shirt? And I said, yes, I love Somuka.
Why do you not?
Finish and clap.
That's a spirit again.
No. We must not confuse. I'm wearing these things as an act of conscientizing people to move towards resistance. If anything that we create or do does not move us to a point of resistance and being free, I'm telling you, it's meaningless. It's.
Do you not think consciousness is a spiritual process?
Primarily.
Do you not think consciousness itself?
Look, we must, for us to be spiritual, to begin with, we must understand ourselves as being human. Are we human?
No. But spirit is a part of being human.
This is the question, are we human? Can we be honest with ourselves? Are black people human?
You mean the body is a mind?
Comrades, what is it? He said to be spiritual is to be human. I'm asking a question. Are black people humans? That's the question I'm asking. And I'll leave it there.
All right, thank you so much to everybody who joined us today, especially on our panel. We thank you so much for your contributions in helping us to begin to navigate and maybe find for ourselves the answer of what it is to be South African, what actually does count, and what we include in our heritage as South Africans. I just like just to point to people to note on the Facebook pages, there are events happening for the Steve Biko Memorial Week. Details of such are going to be posted on the Facebook page, both of Vernac News as well as the Rose Must Fall movement. And also, those of you who didn't get a copy of our last edition, please, there are copies here. And yeah, we'll hope that the conversation will carry on going on our social media platforms, and we'll see you guys in our next session.
Thank you.